It was August 12, 1985. The summer air in Tokyo was heavy and warm. At Haneda Airport, families hurried toward their gates. Children laughed, holding souvenirs from the holiday. A famous musician smiled politely as he boarded. Japan Airlines Flight 123 was ready to make the short journey to Osaka. The passengers had no reason to think anything would be different. Yet above the mountains of Japan, something hidden inside the aircraft was waiting to break. What began years earlier with a single mistake would soon unfold in the sky. This is the story of how a routine flight became the worst single aircraft disaster in history. And it is also a story of courage, of loss, and of voices that still echo today. The evening light wrapped Haneda Airport in gold. Passengers moved quickly, the air buzzing with the rush of the summer holiday. Flight 123 was waiting at the gate, its white and red livery glowing under the sun. Ground crew waved as families and travelers boarded. Among them was Kyu Sakamoto, one of Japan's most famous singers. Inside the cabin, seats were filled with chatter and the shuffle of luggage. For many, this was a familiar route, a short hop to Osaka. As the aircraft lifted from Tokyo Bay, no one knew they had just left the safety of the ground for a flight that would never reach its destination. Behind the smooth climb into the clear sky, a silent floor hidden deep inside the plane's structure was waiting. 7 years earlier, this same aircraft had landed hard at Osaka's Itami Airport. The tail had struck the runway, damaging the rear pressure bulkhead, a critical part of the plane's structure. Repairs were made, but they were not done correctly. A single mistake left a weak joint hidden deep inside the metal. Every time the plane flew, air pressure in the cabin would push against that repaired section. Each climb, each descent caused tiny cracks to grow. Inspectors could not see the damage. The aircraft passed every check, flying thousands of flights without incident. Now, in the golden light of this summer evening, that same weakened bulkhead was just minutes from failing. The passengers were relaxed, the crew focused on routine tasks, unaware of the silent danger riding with them. Above them, the clear blue sky stretched endlessly, but within the walls of the 747, the clock was ticking. At 6:24 p.m., the flight was cruising at 24,000 feet. The engines hummed steadily, then a thunderous boom ripped through the cabin. The sound was deafening, the shock immediate. The rear pressure bulkhead had torn apart, releasing explosive force into the tail of the aircraft. The blast tore off the vertical stabilizer, the towering tail fin that keeps the plane stable. All 4 hydraulic lines, the veins that carry life to the controls, were severed in an instant. The pilots could no longer move the ailerons, rudder, or elevators. In the cabin, oxygen masks fell as air roared out through the damaged tail. Some passengers screamed, others sat frozen in disbelief. In the cockpit, the captain and crew realized the nightmare they faced. They had a fully functioning aircraft in the air, but no way to steer it in the way they had trained for. The 747 began to sway, its nose drifting. The mountains of central Japan lay ahead. The fight to survive had begun. With no controls, the crew had only one tool left: the engines. By adjusting power on the left or right, they could make the plane turn slowly. By increasing thrust, they could make it climb. Reducing power would make it descend. It was crude, unpredictable, and dangerous. Inside the cockpit, the crew worked in tense coordination. The captain called out commands. The first officer worked the throttles with precise, careful movements. The flight engineer monitored speed, altitude, and heading. The aircraft rolled one way, then the other, each correction swinging it back in the opposite direction. Passengers felt the unsettling rhythm of a slow bank, a drop, a sudden climb. Some clutched armrests, others held hands, whispering prayers. The mountains ahead grew closer with every minute. The crew fought to keep the 747 away from the ridges, using every bit of skill they had. They knew they could not land the plane this way, but they also knew giving up was not an option. 32 minutes of desperate flying lay ahead. The sound of rushing air filled the cabin. Passengers could see the worry in each other's faces. A few began to write letters to their families, messages filled with love, fear, and regret. One note, later found among the wreckage, was written by a father to his wife and children. His words spoke of gratitude for his life, sorrow for what was coming, and instructions for his family to care for one another. In the cockpit, the crew pushed on, fighting for control. The crew's battle with the 747 stretched on. Each correction took precious seconds to take effect, and the aircraft responded like a slow, stubborn giant. Sometimes it climbed, stalling dangerously before dropping again. Other times it banked toward the mountains, forcing the crew to fight it back with careful bursts of thrust. In the cockpit, the captain's voice stayed calm, his commands sharp. The first officer's hands never left the throttles, moving them with tiny, deliberate adjustments. The flight engineer read out speed, altitude, and heading like a lifeline. The minutes felt like hours. Every second alive was a victory, but the crew knew they were running out of space, time, and luck. The mountains ahead were closing in, and there would be no second chance if they miscalculated. At 6:56 p.m., the aircraft's nose lifted sharply. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the crew might regain control, but the climb turned into a stall. The left wing dipped hard, the horizon tilted. The mountains rushed up toward them. Warnings sounded in the cockpit. The engines roared unevenly as the crew made one final desperate attempt to recover. Seconds later, the 747 struck the ridge of Mount Takamagahara at over 340 knots. The impact tore the fuselage apart, scattering wreckage down the slope. Fires broke out among the broken pieces of metal. Smoke curled into the evening sky. When the radar signal disappeared, rescue teams were alerted. Helicopters took off to search the darkening mountains. From the air, faint fires could be seen deep in the forest. But the terrain was steep, the location unclear, and communication between teams began to falter. Believing it unsafe to land in the dark, the helicopters turned back. On the mountainside, the survivors called into the night, voices weak but determined. Some were injured, others dazed, all surrounded by the smell of fuel and the flicker of small fires. The hours dragged on. The temperature dropped. The sounds of the forest replaced the cries for help. By the time the first rescuers reached the site at sunrise, the silence spoke louder than anything else. For the 4 who endured the night, rescue had come just in time. For many others, the wait had been far too long. In the days after the crash, investigators began piecing together what had happened. The wreckage told a silent story. The missing tail fin, the severed hydraulic lines, and the torn rear pressure bulkhead all pointed to a failure deep inside the aircraft. They traced it back to 1978, when the plane had suffered a tailstrike at Itami Airport. Boeing's repair had used 2 separate metal plates instead of one continuous piece, leaving a joint that slowly weakened over the years. Every pressurization cycle widened tiny cracks until the bulkhead could no longer hold. In the years after the crash, Japan Airlines built the Safety Promotion Center to preserve the memory of Flight 123. Inside, pieces of the wreckage are displayed alongside letters written by passengers in their final moments. Changes followed. Aircraft repairs were more strictly checked. Inspection routines became more thorough. Rescue operations were reorganized to avoid the delays that had cost lives that night. For the families, the memories never faded. Each August, people gather to remember those lost. The mountains remain quiet, but the story of Flight 123 still speaks. Flight 123 was more than an accident. It was the meeting point of history, human error, and courage. It began with a scar in the metal that no one could see. It ended with the sound of engines fading into the mountains. The lessons from that night live on, shaping the skies we travel in today. And as long as their story is told, the 520 lives lost will never be forgotten.